Welcome back, everyone. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing two functional parameters that you'll definitely be encountering as you look at other people's code and as you begin to look at open source code on the internet. And those are star args and double star kwargs, and they stand for arguments and keyword arguments. Eventually, if you work with Python functions long enough, you're going to want a way to accept an arbitrary number of arguments and keyword arguments without having to predefine a bunch of parameters in your function calls. So let's show you what I'm talking about by jumping to a Jupyter notebook. Let's begin by doing the following. I'm going to create a function, def, and we'll call it myfunc. And what this function is going to do is it's going to accept two numbers, number A and number B, and we'll put a little comment here, returns 5% of the sum of A and B. So let's go ahead and do that. What we're going to do is say sum, and we need to pass this in as a tuple or a list here, A and B. So it takes the sum of everything in that tuple, A and B, and then we multiply it by 0.05. So then when I call my func, and let's pass in two numbers, let's say 40 and 60. Well, 40 plus 60 is 100, and 5% of 100 is 5. All right, great. Now the question arises that what if I had more numbers or more parameters to pass in? Notice right now that A and B, these are examples of what are called positional arguments. That is to say that right now 40 is assigned to A because it was in the first position or the first argument, and that 60 is assigned to B because it was in the second position or second argument. And notice that when we want to work with multiple positional arguments in the sum function, we had to pass them in as a tuple. The question I was saying was, what if we want to work with more than two numbers? Well, one thing we could do is assign a lot of parameters. So I could say, well, just in case the person passes in C, I'll have a C there, and I'll set it default to 0 just in case they pass it in. That way, just in case they don't pass it in, it's 0, it won't affect the sum, but they can always overwrite it. And what if they want four numbers? Well, then I'll say D is equal to 0 as well, and I'll have D equal to 0, D here by default. And if I want another number, I can say E equal to 0 here, and we'll say E is here as well. And now I still get back the same result, but I can always pass in more parameters here. So now if I pass in an extra 100, I get back 10 as 5% of 200. And if I want 5% of, let's say, 300, then I end up getting 15 here. And I can keep adding, but you'll notice I'll eventually hit a limit up to E, because if I keep adding in more numbers, eventually I'll say type error, hey, it only takes from 2 to 5 positional arguments, but 6 were given. And this is where we can use that star args. It allows us to set this to take an arbitrary number of arguments. So when a function parameter starts with that star or asterisk, what I'm going to do here is say def myfunc star args. What this allows me to do is treat this as a tuple of parameters that are coming in. And then I'm going to say return sum of args, and then multiply that by 0.05. And now I can pass in as many arguments as I want. And by default, what Python is going to do is it's going to take all the parameters that are passed in and set them to be inside a tuple. So we're going to pass in, let's say, 40 and 60, and we get back 5. If I add in another 100 there, I get back 10. And I can keep adding in as many numbers as I want here with no problems. And that's basically the whole point of this star args. And I want to just really bring the point home that if I just print out what args actually looks like to this function, it just looks like a tuple here. So all this does, when it starts with this star term, it says, okay, whatever this parameter is, the user can pass in as many as they want, and it's going to be treated as a tuple inside of this function. And that's really useful for a lot of things. You can loop through it, or iterate through it, or sum it together, or do any sort of aggregation function on whatever this tuple that is being passed in. You should also notice that by convention, we use args, but this technically is indicated by the fact that there's that star term there. Args can be any other keyword you want. For example, if I say star spam, and I say print spam, it has the exact same effect. Args, that word itself, is an arbitrary choice as long as it's followed by this asterisk or star. Now, by convention, you should always use args. Otherwise, someone else is going to be reading your code and scratching their head thinking, why did this person choose spam? So by convention, by pep8 styling, you should always use star with args. Okay, so that's arguments and an arbitrary number of arguments. So you just pass them in now, and you get to have them as a tuple inside your function. So then you could do something like for item in args, print item, and you get back 40, 60, 100. So this allows you, again, pass in as many arguments as you want, and you get this tuple of arguments to play around with inside your function. Similarly, Python offers a way to handle an arbitrary number of keyworded arguments. So instead of creating a tuple of values, what happens is we use ** kwargs, which is keyword arguments, and that builds a dictionary of key value pairs. So let's build out a function that utilizes that. We're going to say def myfunc ** kwargs, and we will say if, let's make a function, if fruit is in keyword arguments, then I'm going to print something like my fruit of choice is, and then here is where we're going to use .format. And the .format call is keywords arguments. We're going to treat it as a dictionary that's coming in. So just like args here, so *args returns back a tuple, what ** keyword arguments does, it returns back a dictionary. Meaning, I can grab this, pass in fruits here, and let me zoom out one level so we can see the whole thing. And then I'm going to say else, print, I did not find any fruit here. Okay, so what does this actually mean? Well, it means the following. I can call my func now and pass in fruit equal to apple. And it turns out that it says my fruit of choice is apple. And I can also pass in some other keywords. Maybe I want to say my favorite veggie is equal to lettuce. And Python is no longer complaining. And that's the power of these arbitrary keyword arguments. What keyword arguments now is if we print it out at the very beginning, it's just a dictionary. We see here that fruit is now attached to apple, veggie is now attached to lettuce, and it allows you to call it any way you want. So just like args up here returned back a tuple, keyword arguments returned back a dictionary that you can then play around with inside your function. So now the user is going to be able to define any parameters you want, and they're going to be able to call them and use them later on inside of your function. And again, kwargs, that is technically an arbitrary choice. What is really indicating this to be a dictionary once it's inside is the use of 2 asterisks here, or 2 stars. So again, I'm going to change this to something that's to make that really obvious. I could say ** jelly, and let's delete all this and just say print jelly. You notice I get back the same result here. So by convention, you should be using kwargs or keyword arguments here, but keep in mind what's really indicating to Python that it's special is these 2 stars in front of it. And now to end our discussion of arguments and keyword arguments is we can actually use these in combination. So I will show you a simple example of that. You can check out the notebook for another example of this, but we're going to accept both arguments at the beginning and keyword arguments at the beginning. And we'll say the following. We're going to print out I would like blank blank, and I'm going to say .format, and we're going to grab args of 0, and then we'll say kwargs of, and we'll expect it to be some sort of food item there. So then I can call my func, and I can pass in as many numbers here as I want, so 10, 20, 30, and those will now be accepted inside of the tuple. And then after that, I can pass in as many keyword arguments as I want. So I could say something like fruit is equal to orange, food is equal to eggs, and maybe animal equal to dog. And then when I run this, what happens is it takes in the args. So let's print these out so we can really see what's going on here. And takes in the keyword arguments as well. Keyword arguments here. It takes in those arguments, takes them in as a tuple so you can do whatever you want with them. It takes in the keyword arguments, sets them as a dictionary so you can use whatever you want with them. And then you can kind of look for things here and then print out whatever you want. And again, this allows you to take in an arbitrary number of arguments that you don't need to define beforehand. And this is going to be especially useful when you begin to use outside libraries. So right now, at your current stage, you're not going to find a whole lot of use cases for args and keyword arguments, but later on, they're going to become incredibly powerful tools for you to leverage in your own code. But for right now, you should just keep in mind that you have a way to accept an arbitrary number of arguments. The only final point I'd like to make here is that because we said args first and keyword arguments, it has to go in that order. We have to have that list or tuple of arguments, and then after that, we have to have the keyword arguments. What we're not able to do is after this, define an argument without a keyword. Otherwise, Python's going to complain. It's going to say, hey, you have a positional argument which is following a keyword argument. It has to be in the same order you prescribed, which was all the arguments first, then all the keyword arguments. All right, that's the basics of args and kwargs. I hope you found that helpful. We'll see you at the next lecture.